So let's start off the email I know that went out this week. You and other Texas members of Congress are calling on the Secretary of Education to reverse the decision to close the Department of Education's regional office. So the Civil Rights Building in Dallas. Why do you feel this closure is would be so impactful to people here in Texas?
Well, first of all, obviously I'm a Texas representative, so I'm always going to look out for those that are here working, but more importantly, it's, I'm a civil rights lawyer. So if I'm really going to be true to the things that I fought for in court before, then this kind of stands the reason that this is really an epicenter of something that is so critical to everyone, not just those in Texas, but everyone in this country. Because when we look at civil rights, and I had a hearing here recently where I explained to my colleagues that every time I say civil rights, for whatever reason, y'all think that I'm only talking about black folk. And I had to read the list of people that qualify as having civil rights that need to be preserved. And so when we look at those with disabilities and the claims that they may have, this is who would deal with those types of issues. So it's a lot bigger than race, even though it seems like everything has kind of been put into, take us back to the 1960s or prior to now with this administration and their attack on race in general. This is bigger than that. But more importantly, if I was to talk about Department of Education as a whole, and I think that's where I'd like to go in general, because we only recently learned that it is the president's intention, I believe at the time of this recording, it is his intention to go ahead and sign an executive order decimating the entire Department of Education. And a lot of people don't necessarily know what it is the Department of Education does. They're just like, you know what? It's always existed, and I got to pay my student loans to somebody over there, right? But it's bigger than that. When we are talking about people having access to higher education, it comes through the Department of Education. That's who reviews the FAFSA applications and things like that. So that's number one. So now we're putting us into this situation where maybe only the haves will be able to go to college. Those people who have parents who say are able to pay for whatever the amount of college is, kind of like what we see happening on the lower level in the state of Texas. We continue to see this trend from Republicans to where education should only be limited to those that are privileged, meaning those that have money. And so that's why this voucher scam is such a big deal, because it's only allowing for those that live in, say, areas that have these fancy private schools and these fancy private schools that are willing to take you in and then use your voucher, right? And so that's where the Republican Party is moving. In addition to that, though, school lunch programs that we have for our kiddos that say are on a reduced or free lunch, that all comes through Department of Education as well. So now we're talking about the party that is so pro-life saying, you know what, I'm okay with starving children that are going to school. And we know that the number one thing that impacts a child and their ability to learn is whether or not they've actually been nourished. And so the fact that he plans to sign this executive order, knowing, number one, and maybe he doesn't know, I may be giving him too much credit, but the Department of Education was created by Congress. The only way to get rid of the Department of Education is by Congress. So he currently has the House and the Senate, and they seemingly will never do anything to upset him. So they will do whatever he wants them to do. And of course, he can always sign it into law. So the only plea that I think Democrats have been really making is that if you're going to do it, just do it legally. Don't just sit up here and think that with the stroke of a pen, you can do something like decimate the Department of Education or any other department.
So I guess out of that, my question would be, you mentioned the House and the Senate, since he has control of them. What can Democrats do? What can you do to effectively try to at least talk about your opposition, or make what can you do effectively in Washington right now when he does have that control?
Yeah, so I think that this comes down to education, right? Again, because we do have these big departments in government, and a lot of times if you don't know what it is, it's easy for you to pick on those departments. It's kind of like what we've seen with USAID. If you were interacting with USAID, then you're kind of like, okay, whatever, right? Like, yes, it can go away. So I think that number one, we've got to educate people and make sure that they know the truth. And so that comes in different ways. Obviously, I do a lot of things on social media, but also just making sure that we're sitting down, we're doing the local media. There are some people that we are really trying to push in our caucus, say, hey, make sure you're doing local media. Don't just go chasing kind of national media, because it's your constituents that are going to be watching the local media. And making sure that we are coordinating with those that are on the outside. So I believe in an inside-outside game. And so those organizations that are really fighting for our democracy, making sure that we empower them with the information so that they can talk to their organizations and they can organize and make phone calls and send letters and sometimes show up and actually protest. We know that people power is really the only power that we really have. And so we've seen them move the needle. We also know that we've been winning in the courts. And I know that a lot of people get frustrated at the thought of court. As someone who consistently practiced in court, it wasn't necessarily that justice was ever really that swift when we would think about the courts. But I can applaud the courts in that they have been moving quickly, because a lot of these cases qualify as emergency actions, right? But when you think about, say, the unlawful firings under this administration, you look at that and, even if the court gets to it in 2 weeks, guess what? Somebody may lose everything in 2 weeks without their job, without a check. And so really, it still isn't necessarily fast enough, but that's what we've got right now. The other thing the Democrats need to do is, in the House, we have to stick together. We don't have the numbers, that is true. But it only takes a couple of people peeling off on the Republican side. It seems like right now there's only one Republican who has his own mind, is going to do what he believes is right for his constituency, and that's Representative Massey. But if a few more grow a spine because they're afraid to go home or they're afraid about a primary challenge and things like that, then we may see that so long as we stick together, we will have some wins in the House. When it comes to the Senate, they have a few more tools that we don't. We just saw when it came down to the continuing resolution that the Senate Democrats failed to fully use the tool that they had available to them with the cloture vote. And basically that just means that the threshold is raised to 60 votes, which right now, when it comes to the Republicans in the Senate, they only have 53. There's a few things that fall outside of that 60 threshold. One of them happens to be our official passage of our budget. But a continuing resolution is different. That's not the official budget, or it became the official budget this time. And so we need Senate Democrats to really stand together on their side and not roll over and give the Republicans whatever it is that they want.
I know there's been a lot of harsh words this week from Democrats, or most Democrats, towards Chuck Schumer.
Yeah. I think that what you see as a whole when it comes to Democrats is that we are really hard on ourselves, right? Think of us as, everyday people who look in the mirror and we see all the imperfections. That is what we do as a party. And it's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in the sense that we put up some of the most qualified people to run for office because we are so critical. It's also a curse when it's like, yes, we will fight each other. And yes, I was one of those, and I still am not very happy with Chuck Schumer. But I do understand that at the end of the day, he isn't my biggest problem. My biggest problem is the Republicans and Trump. But, he gonna catch the smoke too. And so that's something that we don't see out of Republicans. They do not look in the mirror and criticize themselves at all. That is how we ended up with the 34-count convicted felon sitting in the White House, because they failed to critique their own. It does make sure that we get the best of the best when it comes to running on the Democratic ticket. But again, it's a double-edged sword, and it's a blessing and a curse.
Okay, so when it comes to executive actions, you mentioned those just a minute ago, specifically about the Department of Education. What are some of the different actions, executive-wise, that have been taking place that you feel like has impacted Texans? Maybe infrastructure, healthcare, education?
Yeah, I honestly don't know what all he's done. I just know he's done a lot of them. I will tell you that it's also hard to know the impact, because there's a question about, for instance, let me just make sure I make it plain. We know that he signed the executive order deciding that birthright citizenship was over, right? Like, he thought with the stroke of a pen that was happening in Texas. Happens to be a majority minority state. Most people don't realize that, but we have more people of color than not in this state. And when we look at the most recent census, the state grew by approximately 4 million people. Of those 4 million people, approximately half of them were Latino. And when we do the census, we're counting people that have citizenship as well as those that don't have citizenship, because when it comes down to our roads and our bridges and our infrastructure, our education, our hospitals, things like that, we need to know how many people are we accounting for, okay? And so when you think about the fact that Texas does have a large Latino community, and we look at the numbers as it relates to citizenship and not citizenship, that's something that truly does impact us. But does it? Not really, right? Because he signed it into law, but it wasn't legal. So immediately a court reversed that. So it's hard to say which executive orders are actually hitting because so many of them have been challenged, and for the most part, I can't tell you what they've actually won as an administration. I will say that part of what we see is confusion. And so if I had to guess that there's an impact, I would say that that's probably one of the executive orders that's made the biggest impact, not really because of the legality of it, but because of the confusion of it. So I've talked to those that are in construction. I've talked to those that are in farming. And they've talked about how they've had workers that did not show up to work, that aren't showing up to work. Now, this is impacting those from the immigrant community across the country, but obviously it hits Texas a little bit harder, especially since we do agriculture in a very big way. And so, yeah, I would say that that's probably the most impactful, even though it's illegal, if that makes sense.
Right, you're just saying that sometimes there are still some of these that are being played out in courts that may be appealed, that sort of thing. I see, I understand what you're saying. Okay, so you mentioned Elon a minute ago.
Yeah.
I know I've heard you've been very outspoken about just what they've all been doing in DOGE.
Yeah.
So let me talk about, do you believe that the opposition's message to DOGE is getting out to people, or is there a greater support than maybe the party realized?
People are okay with the mission of DOGE, which at the end of the day, or the stated mission of DOGE, let me say that, the stated mission of DOGE, the people are okay with that. And that is something that we do on Oversight. The entire Oversight Committee that I served on last term, as well as this term, our job is to look for waste, fraud, and abuse. That is what our job is in general. So I think that the American people never want to think about, oh, I'm sending my money into the federal government and there's no one that's keeping oversight over whether or not good or bad guys are getting this, right? So everyone is okay with that mission. But what they have found is that DOGE is not doing it, number one. They found that this is supposed to be the smartest of the smartest people, yet somehow you're going out and you're firing people, such as the people that are supposed to be keeping our nuclear stockpile safe and watching over it, and then saying, oh, we don't even know how to hire them back. And the people that are supposed to be making sure that they're monitoring the bird flu to keep us safe and to hopefully get the price of eggs down. Oh, we fired all of them. We didn't realize that's what they did. And so I think that the American people have said, we were always okay with the mission, but this execution is not what we ever banked for. We've got people that work in forestry that are being fired everywhere. We've got, and we know, as we looked at the wildfires that took place in California, how important it is for us to have those people, right? Even when we start looking at our parks, or even when we start looking at them wanting to get rid of those at NOAA. Well, this is how we are informed of whatever great storms are coming through. It was interesting because I was communicating with some people back in Missouri, and that was when I found out that there were these terrible storms that went through kind of the Midwest, and they were caught off guard. They said no alarms went off. They said they didn't get any notifications on their phones. And so these are the things that no one anticipated, right? So they're okay with the mission, but right now I think the American people are very clear that they are not okay with Elon Musk and whatever it is that he's doing with his little DOGE team.
Okay, so if you could go in, perfect world for you, you could be in charge of DOGE. What would you do differently? How would you do it?
Yeah, so I would, number one, actually be transparent, okay? So that's something that we've not had. I serve on the DOGE subcommittee. No one from DOGE has appeared before the Oversight subcommittee to give these reports, because if someone is committing fraud, we should get that out in front of the American people. We should be recommending that charges be brought against anyone that is participating in fraud. But here's the reality. We know, for instance, when it came down to the PPP loans, that there were a lot of people that ended up getting arrested because they participated in fraud, okay? So people got arrested, people got incarcerated, people were convicted over that. So we are paying attention. When there are people that are engaged in, say, SNAP benefit fraud and things like that, we go after them. That is something that's already taking place. So Department of Defense, that is where they've not been able to pass an audit in the last 6 or 7 audits. And that's also where we've got reports of them paying $1,000 for, say, a toilet. And we know toilets don't cost $1,000. And so that is where we have seen a lot of the abuse taking place. And what it is that we've got all these contracts. And so what they're trying to do is do even more privatization and give out more contracts. And that makes it a little bit murkier. But the fact that we continue to raise the amount of money that is given over to the Department of Defense, and Department of Defense is where we know for sure that there is a lot of maybe fraud, definitely a lot of abuse or something going on, and we can continue to give them even more money. Even in this last continuing resolution, what they ended up doing is they ended up increasing the amount of money going over to defense. When we look at Elon Musk, the vast majority of the money that he gets from the federal government, it comes from defense. And so here it is, they said, you know what, our veterans that say we're dealing with injuries because of burn pits and their service to our country, we're gonna cut back on that money. But we're gonna increase the money to the department that cannot pass a clean audit. And it's also where the guy that supposedly is saving us money, it's where he's getting new contracts every single day. We're gonna increase that money and we're gonna kick veterans out on their behinds. That is what's going on. And that is why people like myself, and actually the vast majority of us that voted against the continuing resolution, that's where we were so outraged. And people also don't understand is that because it wasn't a true stopgap and it's going to the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th, that means we never would have passed a budget for FY25. That means that there's not the line items laid out. Instead, it's just like, here's the money, and Donald Trump and Elon Musk get to use it however they want to, for the most part. So that's what's so scary about this.
When it comes to looking forward, do you feel like there is going to be a meeting with the subcommittee? Are you going to have a face-to-face?
I mean, I'm ready and waiting. The last time that we tried to get the Republicans on the committee to agree to doing a subpoena of Elon Musk, they would not even allow us to debate it. They tabled the motion to subpoena him to the committee. So I'm thinking to myself, if it's so great, then why wouldn't he want to get out here and tell the entire world? Going on X is not the same as coming before Congress, because there are implications if you don't tell the truth to Congress. There's no implications if you go out and don't tell the truth on X. And so that's why I think, the American people aren't crazy. They're figuring this out. This is why you see the protests that are happening at Tesla. This is why you see people selling their Teslas. This is why the Tesla stock is tanking. There's little that we can do for SpaceX because SpaceX is getting their contracts and their money from the federal government. It's the same thing with Starlink. There's little that we can do as it relates to Starlink because they're getting their money from the federal government. And right now, when you want to talk about fraud, nothing looks more fishy or fraudulent than Elon Musk somehow deciding that Starlink is going to get a contract, a multi-billion-dollar contract that was given to Verizon as it relates to our communications when it comes to the FAA. And now he's going to get it. That doesn't seem fraudulent? That doesn't seem like self-dealing to you? It does to me.
You've mentioned the Tesla stock going down, and people selling their Teslas. There've also been attacks on Tesla dealerships and people with cars and King. What do you make of that?
So I think that people are frustrated, but I would never condone any acts of violence. I just wouldn't. The reality is that, yes, we know that the right has been super violent. We saw what happened on January 6th, regardless of how they want to twist it and turn it. We all saw what happened. We all looked on with horror. And at the time, even Republicans admitted that it was terrible, but they were punished. And so I just want to say that anyone that wants to engage in free speech, you absolutely should do it. You should scream it from the rooftops. You should do all the things that the Constitution allows you to do. The Constitution never allows for anybody to commit acts of violence. But I think that people are so passionate about how heartless Elon has been. I had a colleague telling us a story of being in one of his cities that's right there on the border of a very Republican district. And he did a town hall in that city. So a lot of people from the neighboring Republican district came over to his town hall. And he said it lasted way longer than he ever anticipated. And they were recording the vast majority of the time. And as they were about to shut down, and they had shut off the cameras, a man talked about his neighbor. And he told this story about how a neighbor who had been a Trump supporter went out, voted for Trump, thought he was going to be great. He ends up losing his federal job. He ended up committing suicide. So there are people that are losing their lives, whether it's because they literally just don't have a job, but there are then those that are falling into deep depressions of sorts. And so I think that there are some people that say it's just property versus our lives. He's ruining our lives and there's nothing that is happening to him. So they don't look at property and value it the same way that they value lives. And I think that that's what you're seeing play out with some of these things that have evolved from just protest to some individual actors engaging in criminal activity.
With such a polarized time right now, is there anything you think that Democrats and Republicans can sort of come together that would not only benefit the country, but particularly Texans?
I like to say so. I always have to admit that my office has consistently had a strong working relationship with our senior senator. We don't work on reproductive rights, of course, but he's always been of the opinion that if there was something that I felt like was good for Texas, he always wanted me to try to see if their office would work on it instead of me going to find a Democrat. And one of the places that he's always been a really strong partner with me is on fentanyl. Obviously, we're a border state. Mm-hmm. We've talked about the number of lives that have been lost. I'm someone that started working on fentanyl legislation when I was in the state house. And so I've continued that advocacy as someone who's done criminal defense, understands what drug addiction looks like and what it can do to people, and wants to make sure that I can mitigate any type of harm and make sure that people are safe. So I can say that, our senior senator hasn't tried to use this as a campaign issue, but in my opinion, he actually does care. I do believe some people just like to have something to throw out, and fentanyl is one of those things, and they've not engaged in any actual meaningful legislation, because the idea that if you just do something at the border, you're going to fix all the drugs coming in. Well, I got news to tell you. No matter if it's been a Democrat or a Republican sitting in the White House, we have consistently had all types of drugs pour across our border. So it's not a matter of just doing a border. You have to understand that you have to take a multifaceted approach. And I can say, in all honesty, that Senator Cornyn has always been willing to at least listen, talk it out, think it through with his team. And he has signed on to that type of legislation as well as a few other things. I can't say that I have that type of cooperation with Ted Cruz. And I think that tells you more so about where the Republican Party is that you have some people that just want to yell, scream, and shout. And then you have some people that we come from different vantage points. But at the end of the day, we don't doubt the fact that we both want the best for Texas, even though our vision of what's best is completely different. But when we can find some sort of compromise or agreement, we really do seek it out and we really do strive to work towards it. And I can tell you that there are even other Republicans that really sometimes do want to engage in actually solving problems, but they're so afraid of this administration that they don't want to do things that are just common sense. It's kind of like standing up to the president and telling him that Ukraine was not the one that invaded Russia, that it was Russia invade. This isn't partisan, guys. These are just facts. But they are so scared or spineless or whatever it is that they can't even do some of the basic things. But they'll tell you behind closed doors, yeah, he's crazy, like we all know. But they won't do it publicly, right? But I'll tell you that, our senior senator is someone that I respect, because at the end of the day, I ran for office because I really did want to work towards a better Texas 30 and towards a better Texas. Whether we'll ever see eye to eye to get everywhere that I want to get for Texas, probably not. But at least looking to find some kind of space, I'm glad to say that we at least have one senator that is always looking for that space.
One thing that I know here in Texas we are lacking in is mental health facilities, especially in the rural areas, drug treatment centers, especially in rural areas. What would you like to see happen there? If you obviously you and Senator Cornyn,
Yeah.
can work together.
We
on
can
something.
We can work together. I've not talked to him about any of my mental health legislation. That is for sure. So I'm not really sure exactly where he stands on some of that. I don't look at it as partisan, and truly my record reflects that it probably isn't partisan, because when I was in the state house, this was one of the things that we were dealing with as someone who was working in the jails, and I knew that there weren't enough beds to kind of meet the needs of those that were being incarcerated, but they weren't competent to stand trial. They needed to go to state hospitals, things like that. Like, I knew what the backlog was. The backlog was actually close to 2 years at the time for somebody to be able to get into a bed so that we could try to make them competent. And so we were able to work down at the Texas legislature, and we were able to get funding to make sure that UT Southwestern could expand and get us another state hospital right here in actually Texas 100, which was my house district, which is also in Texas 30. So we worked in a bipartisan way. We were able to get that done. But I can tell you that I don't ever anticipate we will ever have the needs when it comes to mental health. We historically have always underfunded it. This is not unique to Texas. Unfortunately, this is an issue that we have throughout the country. And I really would like for someone to actually do the study on the return on investment for when we just make the investments in making sure that we can help people with their mental health. Does this mean that we have more people that are able to be stabilized and work? Does this mean that we have less people that are finding themselves unhoused? Does this mean that we are finding less crime in our communities because we've made those investments? And so for every dollar that we invest in making sure that people have the mental health care that they need, then how many dollars do we get on the return? Because unfortunately, some people don't care about just doing the right thing, the humanitarian thing, the Christian thing for some folk that believe themselves to be very Christian. So let's talk about the money of it. And I can guarantee you, as someone who consistently had to deal with people that were getting caught up in the criminal justice system, even looking at that, like, how much is it costing us in the criminal justice system because we're failing to give them the health care that they need, right? I think that I'd like to see those numbers, and maybe we could sell more people if they're not sold. But I will take you up on the challenge of finding out if the senator is up for it. I will tell you that we are challenged in general when it comes to healthcare in rural America and rural Texas. A lot of this has been because of a failure of the Republican leadership in the state to expand upon Medicaid. And for those that don't understand how it works, this means that there at least is a certain amount of money that you can guarantee is going to come in to those hospitals to make sure that you can keep those hospitals open. When you're in a big city, you have so many other ways to get money into those hospitals. And so you're able to keep the doors open even if Medicaid is not necessarily paying in and helping that hospital out a lot. So, the questions that I want them asking in rural America is it okay for my life expectancy to be cut so much shorter simply because of where I live? And the answer should be no. And they should be requiring of their elected officials on the state level to explain to them why they are not going to the federal government and saying, hey, we want those dollars to come back to our state so that in rural Texas we can have hospitals. And I think that that's one of the big challenges that we'll have, even when we're looking at like the mental health hospitals in general, right, is getting the practitioners to those areas because they've still got to be able to maintain some sort of a practice.
You still have to have someone there
Yeah.
to fill the building.
Yeah.
Okay, my last question. Your name has been mentioned as a potential candidate for 2028. I know that
Yeah.
I have to ask before we
No.
wrap up. But when it comes to, your name has just floated to the top a lot recently in the Democratic
Yeah.
Party as being more influential than most. When you hear that, does it give you pause? Is it something you think about?
I don't think about it. I will tell you that I am truly honored and blessed to even just kind of be mentioned. But I'm also still the girl that really struggles with, are you sure you want to be the politician? Because, there's a really dark side to politics, especially right now. And the higher you ascend, the more hate that is spewed at you, the more death threats you receive, that kind of stuff. And you start to figure out, what really is it all worth, the level of sacrifices that you make personally, right? Like my mom is always like scheduling time to try to see me because I spend the vast majority of my time fighting for people, some of them that I'll never meet a day in my life. That's what I spend my time on. I'm not here very often. I am going and traveling the country doing speaking engagements so that other people can raise money or trying to empower and educate people on how to organize. It is really a hugely sacrificial position to be in. And, the level of scrutiny that is on any politician is high. But I will say that there is an abnormal level of scrutiny as well as number of lies that are waged against me as a woman, especially a Black woman. And I just don't know, because I get caught sometimes in very real moments, such as when I was asked about Elon Musk, and I'm like, I probably will be too real to do anything like that because I'm human. And when I'm pissed off, I sound and look that way. And, I think that the office of presidency has always required something other. And I'm just not in a space where I'm okay with being anything other than who I am. And I am so thankful and grateful to the people of Texas 30 because they love and appreciate me exactly as who I am. And they're not looking for me to be a version of what I'm supposed to be. Instead, they appreciate that I'm authentic and I am me every single day. And I just don't think that with the number of handlers that you get and things like that, that you can really go too high being your authentic self sometimes in this country.
Thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.